Cowboy rescued a native girl from the river. The next day, 5 tribes came on horseback holding gifts. But Caleb Sterling had no idea that pulling her from those dark waters would make him the most hunted man in 3 territories. The storm hit without warning that evening, turning the gentle creek into a raging torrent. Caleb was leading his horse toward the old wooden bridge when he heard it, a desperate cry cutting through the thunder. There, caught in the swirling current, a young native woman fought against the water that seemed determined to claim her life. He didn't think. Caleb threw off his coat and plunged into the icy river, the current immediately trying to drag him under. The girl's dark hair whipped around her face as she struggled, her traditional dress heavy with water. When he finally reached her, her eyes were wide with terror, but she grabbed his outstretched hand with surprising strength. Getting back to shore nearly killed them both. The current fought every stroke, every desperate kick toward the muddy bank. By the time Caleb dragged her onto solid ground, both were gasping, shaking from cold and exhaustion. The girl, she couldn't have been more than 19, coughed up river water while Caleb tried to catch his breath. She looked up at him with eyes that held depths he couldn't understand. When she spoke, her English was careful but clear. "You saved my life." It wasn't gratitude in her voice. It was something else. Something that made the hair on Caleb's neck stand up. "Anyone would have done the same," he said, wringing water from his shirt. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. Most men would have ridden past, especially when it came to helping someone from the tribes. The tensions between settlers and native peoples had only grown worse in recent months. The girl stood slowly, water still dripping from her long black hair. She studied his face as if memorizing every detail. "My name is Ayanna," she said, "and you are mistaken, Caleb Sterling. Not anyone would have risked their life for someone like me." The fact that she knew his name sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. He'd never seen this girl before in his life, yet she spoke his name like she'd been expecting this moment. "How do you—" But Ayanna was already backing toward the tree line, her movements surprisingly graceful for someone who'd nearly drowned minutes before. "Tomorrow you will understand," she said, her voice carrying an odd certainty. "When the sun reaches its highest point, you will see what your kindness has awakened." Before Caleb could ask what she meant, she disappeared into the darkness between the trees, leaving only the sound of the still raging storm and questions that would keep him awake all night. He stood there in the rain, staring at the spot where she'd vanished, unable to shake the feeling that everything in his life had just changed. The way she'd looked at him, the strange weight in her words, the impossible fact that she'd known his name, none of it made sense. But as Caleb mounted his horse and rode toward home through the storm, he couldn't stop thinking about her final words. What could his simple act of rescue have possibly awakened? And why did he have the growing certainty that he was about to find out whether he wanted to or not? Caleb woke to the sound of horses. Not just one or two, dozens of them, their hooves creating a rhythm like distant thunder against the earth. He rolled out of his cot and peered through the single window of his cabin, squinting against the midday sun. What he saw made his blood run cold. 5 distinct groups of riders approached his property from different directions, each group carrying the colors and markings of different tribes. They moved with the deliberate precision of a coordinated plan, not the random wandering of separate bands. As they drew closer, Caleb could see that each rider carried something: bundles, decorated weapons, ornate containers that caught the sunlight. They weren't coming to fight. They were coming to honor. The first group reached his fence line and stopped. An elderly man with silver braids dismounted and approached Caleb's door. Behind him, 4 other tribal leaders did the same, each representing their own people. The gifts they carried weren't simple offerings. These were items of incredible value. Carved eagle feathers, beaded ceremonial pieces, weapons that looked ancient and precious. Caleb stepped outside, his hand instinctively resting near his gun, though something told him violence was the furthest thing from these men's minds. The silver-haired leader spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of authority and something deeper: reverence. "You are the one who pulled Ayanna from the water's grasp," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Caleb replied, his mouth suddenly dry. "Though I don't understand why that brings so many of you here." The old man smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes that Caleb couldn't interpret. "Because, Caleb Sterling, you have done something that changes everything, something that has not happened in 3 generations. Another leader stepped forward, this one younger but carrying himself with equal dignity. He held out a magnificent bow, its wood polished to a deep shine and decorated with intricate silver inlay. This belonged to my grandfather's grandfather. It has never been given to someone outside our people. A third man approached, offering a ceremonial knife with a handle carved from what looked like bone and precious stones. This blade has protected our warriors for over a century. Now it belongs to you. Caleb stared at the gifts being presented, his mind racing. I don't understand. I saved a drowning girl. That's what any decent person would do. The silver-haired elder's expression grew grave. Ayanna is not just any girl, white man. She carries the blood of 5 tribes in her veins, mine included. She is the bridge between our peoples, the one prophesied to bring unity or, he paused, studying Caleb's face, or great destruction. The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. Prophesied? For 3 generations, we have waited for the sign. The one who would save the bridge from drowning would either unite our tribes in peace or scatter them in war forever. The elder's eyes never left Caleb's face. Yesterday, when you chose to risk your life for one of us, you became part of something much larger than yourself. Caleb felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. But I didn't know. I was just trying to help. That is precisely why it matters, another leader said, his voice heavy with meaning. The prophecy speaks of one who saves without knowing, who chooses compassion without understanding its cost. The gifts kept coming, a ceremonial headdress, a necklace of bear claws, a painted shield that looked ancient beyond measure. Each item represented not just value, but sacred trust from peoples who had learned to trust no outsider. But as the last gift was presented, the silver-haired elder's expression darkened. However, there is something you must know. Not all tribes believe the prophecy speaks of unity. Some believe it foretells war, and that you are the one who will trigger it. Caleb's blood turned to ice. What do you mean? 3 tribes honor you today. But there are others, warriors who believe your saving of Ayanna was not destiny, but interference. They see you as the destroyer, not the uniter. The elder's voice dropped to almost a whisper. And they are coming. In the distance, Caleb could see dust clouds on the horizon, more riders approaching. But these carried no gifts. The weapons in their hands caught the sunlight like deadly promises, and even from this distance, he could feel their intent. The peaceful ceremony was about to become something else entirely, and Caleb realized with growing horror that saving one girl from drowning had just painted a target on his back that might never come off. The dust clouds grew larger, and Caleb could now make out individual riders. Unlike the gift-bearing tribes, these warriors painted their faces with black and red war paint, their weapons raised not in ceremony, but in threat. The silver-haired elder beside him tensed, his weathered hand moving to the tomahawk at his belt. How long do we have? Caleb asked, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. Minutes, the elder replied. But there is something you must understand before they arrive. Something about Ayanna that changes everything. Caleb kept his eyes on the approaching war party while listening. Tell me, she is not just the daughter of 5 tribes. She is the last of her bloodline. Her mother was killed protecting a secret that could end the conflicts between our peoples forever. Ayanna carries that secret now, and by saving her, you have become its guardian, whether you chose to be or not. The words hit Caleb like a sledgehammer. What secret? The elder reached into his leather pouch and pulled out a small, intricately carved stone that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. This, the location of the sacred valley, a place where our ancestors buried something that could bring peace to all tribes, or destroy them entirely if it falls into the wrong hands. Why are you telling me this? Because Ayanna cannot remember where the valley is. The trauma of her mother's death, the shock of nearly drowning, her memory is fractured. But there is one way to restore it. The elder's eyes met Caleb's with desperate intensity. She must trust completely, and for reasons none of us understand. She trusts you. Before Caleb could respond, the war party crested the hill. Their leader, a fierce warrior with scars covering half his face, raised his spear and let out a battle cry that made the peaceful tribes behind Caleb shift nervously. This was Koruk, known throughout the territories as a man who solved problems with blood. Koruk's voice carried across the distance like the crack of a whip. Caleb Sterling, you have meddled in affairs beyond your understanding. The bridge daughter belongs with her people, not with a white man who knows nothing of our ways. The silver-haired elder whispered urgently, he believes that if he kills you, the prophecy will be broken and the old ways preserved. He sees change as destruction. Koruk and his warriors dismounted, forming a semicircle around Caleb's property. The peaceful tribes positioned themselves protectively, but they were outnumbered. Caleb could feel the tension building toward an explosion that would leave bodies scattered across his land. "Where is the girl?" Koruk demanded, his scarred face twisted with rage. "Where is Ayanna?" Caleb opened his mouth to say he didn't know, but movement in the tree line caught his eye. There, stepping out of the shadows like a ghost, was Ayanna herself. But she looked different now, stronger, more regal, as if the near drowning had awakened something that had been sleeping inside her. She walked between the two groups with the confidence of someone who had never known fear, her dark eyes fixed on Koruk with an intensity that made even the war chief hesitate. "You want to know where I am, Koruk," she said, her voice carrying across the clearing with surprising power. "I am exactly where I choose to be." But what she said next would shatter everything Caleb thought he knew about the girl he had saved. Ayanna stepped closer to Koruk, her movements fluid and deliberate. "You think I needed saving yesterday, but you are wrong. I was not drowning by accident." The words sent shockwaves through both groups of warriors. Caleb felt his world tilt on its axis. "What do you mean?" She turned to face him, and for the first time since pulling her from the river, Caleb saw something in her eyes that terrified him. Calculation. "I threw myself into that river because I knew you would be there. I knew you would save me, and I knew that act would bring all of you here, to this moment." Koruk's scarred face contorted with rage. "You manipulated us all. I did what was necessary." Ayanna's voice carried an authority that seemed impossible for someone so young. "The prophecy speaks of choice, but it was never about chance. It was about creating the moment where that choice must be made." The silver-haired elder stepped forward, his face pale with understanding. "The memory loss, it was never real." Ayanna smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "My mother taught me many things before she died, including how to make people see what they expect to see." She reached into her dress and pulled out the same shimmering stone the elder had shown Caleb, but this one was larger, more radiant. The sacred valley was never lost. I have known its location since childhood. Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. "Then why the charade? Why make me a part of this?" "Because the prophecy requires a choice from someone outside our conflicts. Someone who acts from compassion rather than tradition or fear." Ayanna's eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "Tell me, Caleb Sterling, now that you know the truth, what will you choose?" Before he could answer, she continued, "The Sacred Valley contains weapons created by our ancestors, weapons that could end the white man's expansion forever, or could destroy every tribe that refuses to unite under one leadership." She held up the stone, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. "This stone is the key to those weapons." Koruk took a step forward, his warriors following. "Give me the stone, girl. It belongs with those who will use it to protect our people. Protect them by starting a war that will consume everything?" Ayanna shook her head. "That path leads only to death." The silver-haired elder's voice was barely a whisper. "And the other path? Unity. All tribes working together, sharing the power equally. But that requires trust, something that can only be proven through an outsider's choice." She extended the stone toward Caleb. "This is why you were chosen, not by chance, but by design." Caleb stared at the glowing stone, understanding finally dawning on him. If he took it, he would be choosing sides in a conflict that could reshape the entire territory. If he refused it, people would die anyway. But different people. Koruk raised his spear. "The white man cannot be trusted with such power. I will kill him before I let him touch what belongs to us." "And if you kill him," Ayanna said calmly, "you prove that our people are exactly what the whites believe us to be, savages who solve everything with violence. The stone will shatter, the weapons will be lost forever, and our children will face an enemy we could have defeated." The tension in the air was so thick Caleb could barely breathe. Every warrior present had their weapons ready. One wrong move, one wrong word, and this would become a massacre that would be remembered for generations. But as Caleb reached for the stone, a new sound cut through the silence, the thunder of approaching hooves from yet another direction. More riders were coming, and these carried the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers. The military had found them, and they were coming in force, clearly intending to end whatever was happening here with bullets and blood. The choice Caleb had to make just became infinitely more complicated. The cavalry approached with military precision, their rifles glinting in the afternoon sun. Caleb counted at least 30 soldiers, led by a captain whose face showed the hard lines of a man who had seen too much frontier violence. They had clearly been tracking the tribal movements and were ready for a fight. "This is Captain Morrison," the officer called out as his men formed a battle line. "By order of the territorial government, you are all trespassing on private land. Disperse immediately or face the consequences." Koruk's warriors shifted into fighting positions, their weapons trained not just on the soldiers, but on Caleb and the peaceful tribes as well. The silver-haired elders' men responded by raising their own arms. In seconds, what had been a tense negotiation became a three-way standoff where any sudden movement would trigger a bloodbath. Ayanna still held the stone extended toward Caleb, her dark eyes never leaving his face. "Choose now," she whispered urgently, "before they take the choice away from all of us." Caleb's mind raced through the possibilities. If he took the stone and sided with the tribes, he would be marked as a traitor by his own people. The cavalry would hunt him to the ends of the earth. If he refused it and sided with the military, he would be responsible for the destruction of ancient knowledge that could bring peace, and the certain death of everyone here except the soldiers. But there was a third option forming in his mind, one that none of them seemed to have considered. "Captain Morrison," Caleb called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "These people came to my land peacefully. They brought gifts, not weapons. Whatever conflict you think you're preventing, you're about to create something much worse." Morrison's cold eyes fixed on him. "Mr. Sterling, you're harboring known hostiles. Step away from them now, and you won't be charged as an accomplice. If you were Caleb, what would you do? Trust the military to handle a situation they clearly don't understand? Or take the stone and risk everything on the word of a girl who had already proven she was willing to manipulate everyone around her? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose, because what Caleb decided next would determine whether this day ended in unity or massacre. "There's something you all need to understand," Caleb said, taking a step forward so his voice would carry to everyone present. "This isn't about choosing sides. It's about choosing whether we solve our problems like civilized people or like animals." He reached out and took the stone from Ayanna's hands. The moment his fingers touched its surface, he felt a surge of energy that seemed to connect him to something vast and ancient. Images flashed through his mind, visions of great battles, of tribes united in common cause, of weapons that could level mountains. But he also saw something else. The true purpose of the Sacred Valley wasn't to create weapons of war. It was to forge tools of unity. The ancestors hadn't hidden instruments of destruction, but artifacts that could bind peoples together in ways that made conflict impossible. "Captain Morrison," Caleb said, his voice now carrying a strange resonance that made everyone present lean forward to listen. "Lower your weapons. What we're dealing with here isn't a threat to the territory. It's the key to saving it." Morrison's face darkened. "Mr. Sterling, you have 10 seconds to surrender that object and step away from the hostiles." Koruk raised his spear higher. "The white man thinks he can command spirits he doesn't understand. He will destroy us all." But Ayanna was smiling now, the expression of pure satisfaction spreading across her face. "He understands more than you think," she said softly. "The stone has chosen him, just as I knew it would." The energy from the stone was growing stronger, and Caleb realized with dawning horror that it wasn't just showing him visions, it was changing him. And once that change was complete, there would be no going back. The transformation hit Caleb like lightning. The stone's energy coursed through his veins, and suddenly he could understand the ancient language carved into its surface. More than understand. He could feel the intentions behind every symbol, the hopes and fears of the people who had created this artifact generations ago. They hadn't made a weapon at all. They had created a test. "Captain Morrison, Koruk, all of you, listen to me," Caleb said, his voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to reach directly into the souls of everyone present. "The Sacred Valley isn't what any of you think it is." Morrison's finger tightened on his trigger. "Sterling, you have 5 seconds. It's a place of judgment," Caleb continued, the words flowing from knowledge that wasn't his own. The ancestors knew this day would come. They knew that someday, whites and natives would stand on the edge of total war. So they created a trial. Koruk's scarred face twisted with confusion and rage. "You speak lies with a forked tongue. The stone doesn't give power," Caleb said, feeling the truth of it burning in his chest. "It measures worthiness, and right now, it's measuring all of us." Ayanna's smile faltered for the first time. "That's not..." The prophecy spoke of weapons. The prophecy spoke of tools that could unite or destroy, but it never said those tools were made of metal or wood. Caleb looked around at the three groups of armed men, all poised to kill each other. The tool is choice itself. The weapon is what we become when we make the wrong one. The stone in his hands grew brighter, its light now visible even in the afternoon sun. As it did, something impossible began to happen. The weapons in everyone's hands started to feel heavier, as if the metal itself was resisting their purpose. Morrison struggled to keep his rifle raised. What kind of witchcraft? Not witchcraft. Truth. Caleb's eyes moved from face to face, seeing past the paint and uniforms to the men beneath. Every one of you is afraid. Afraid of losing your people, your way of life, your honor. But fear makes cowards of us all. Koruk's spear was trembling in his grip now, not from weakness, but from some force that seemed to be pulling it toward the ground. This is impossible. The ancestors were smarter than we gave them credit for, Caleb said, understanding flooding through him as the stone's energy peaked. They knew that any weapon they created could be stolen, corrupted, used for evil. So instead, they created something that could only be activated by someone willing to sacrifice everything for peace. The silver-haired elder's eyes widened with comprehension. The drowning, the rescue. It was never about saving Ayanna physically. She was drowning in hatred, Caleb realized, looking at the girl who had orchestrated all of this. Just like all of you. Just like I was. Before yesterday. Ayanna's mask finally slipped completely, and Caleb saw her for what she truly was. Not a manipulator, but a desperate young woman trying to prevent a war that would consume everyone she had ever loved. Tears streamed down her face as the weight of her deception crashed down on her. I thought if I could force the choice, if I could make someone from outside our conflicts choose unity, she whispered. You can't force unity, Caleb said gently. It has to be chosen freely by everyone involved, and that choice has to be made right now. The stone's light was now so bright that it was hard to look at directly, but in that light, Caleb could see something that terrified him more than any weapon ever could. The future that awaited them if they chose wrong. Blood, fire, generations of children growing up knowing only hatred and violence. Captain Morrison, Caleb said, his voice carrying across the clearing with the authority of absolute truth. Koruk, all of you, the stone is showing us what comes next. Look into the light and see what your choices create. But as they all turned toward the blazing artifact in his hands, Caleb realized that seeing the future and choosing to change it were two very different things. One by one, they looked into the stone's blazing light, and one by one, their faces changed as the visions hit them. Captain Morrison saw his own children growing up in a world where every shadow could hide an enemy, where every peaceful settlement lived in fear of the next raid. He saw himself old and broken, having spent decades hunting ghosts through territories stained with blood that would never wash clean. Koruk witnessed his people driven to extinction, not by bullets, but by their own pride. He watched as refusing to adapt led to slow starvation on barren reservations, his culture dying not in glorious battle, but in bitter poverty and despair. The silver-haired elder saw unity achieved through mutual annihilation, peace created only because there was no one left to fight. But they also saw the other path, communities where white and native children played together. Trading posts where languages mixed and new traditions were born from old ones. A future where differences became strengths instead of reasons for war. The visions lasted only seconds, but they felt like lifetimes. When the light finally dimmed, the clearing fell into absolute silence. Morrison was the first to speak, his voice shaken. That was real? Real as tomorrow's sunrise, Caleb replied, feeling the stone's power beginning to ebb. The question is, which tomorrow do you want to see? Koruk slowly lowered his spear, his scarred face reflecting an internal battle between everything he had believed and what he had just witnessed. The ancestors' magic shows many possibilities. How do we know which path we will actually walk? Because we choose it, Ayanna said, stepping forward with tears still streaming down her face. Right here, right now. Every decision we make from this moment forward either leads us toward unity or tears us further apart. Morrison looked around at the tribal warriors who had been his enemies moments before, seeing them now as fathers and sons rather than threats. What are you proposing? The silver-haired elder straightened, his voice carrying the weight of generations. A treaty, not just words on paper that can be broken when convenient, but a bond sealed with the stone's witness. Our tribes will share the knowledge of the sacred valley with your people. In return, your government will guarantee our hunting grounds and sacred sites forever. I don't have the authority to make such promises, Morrison said, but his tone suggested he was considering possibilities that had seemed impossible minutes before. Then we make them to each other, Caleb said, the stone still warm in his hands. Man to man, family to family. The governments can follow or be left behind. Koruk's grip on his spear loosened further. And if the white settlements break this bond, if they take our lands despite pretty words, then the stone will know, Ayanna said simply. And the next time someone faces this choice, they will see what betrayal costs. Morrison removed his hat, running a hand through graying hair. My superiors won't understand. They'll call me a traitor for even talking to you. Some prices are worth paying, Caleb said, thinking of the drowning girl he had pulled from dark waters less than 24 hours ago. The question is whether we're brave enough to pay them. But even as hope began to bloom in the clearing, a new sound cut through the moment, the crack of a rifle from the tree line. Someone had been watching, waiting, and now they were taking action to ensure this unprecedented gathering would end in blood after all. The bullet struck the stone in Caleb's hands, sending fragments of ancient crystal flying. But instead of shattering completely, the artifact released one final burst of energy that swept across the clearing like a wave of pure truth. From the tree line, a figure emerged. Colonel Hayes, Morrison's commanding officer, his rifle still smoking. Behind him came a dozen more soldiers, their faces hard with the conviction of men who believed they were preventing a massacre. Captain Morrison, step away from the hostiles immediately, Hayes barked, his voice cutting through the aftermath of the stone's final pulse. This gathering ends now. But something extraordinary had happened when the bullet struck. The stone's energy hadn't dispersed. It had entered every person present, creating a connection that couldn't be severed by orders or threats. Morrison turned to face his superior officer, his hand moving away from his weapon. Colonel, with respect, you don't understand what's happening here. I understand plenty. You've been compromised by savages and their heathen magic. Hayes raised his rifle toward Caleb. And you, Sterling, will hang for treason. Koruk stepped forward, placing himself between the rifle and Caleb. If you wish to kill the Bridgewalker, you must first kill me. One by one, the other tribal leaders did the same. Then, to everyone's shock, Morrison's soldiers began stepping forward as well, their weapons lowered. The stone's final energy had shown them the same visions, the same possible futures. Colonel, one of the younger soldiers said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing. We won't fire on peaceful people. Hayes's face contorted with rage. You're all under arrest for mutiny. No, Ayanna said, walking toward the colonel with the same fearless grace she had shown throughout this impossible day. They're under the protection of something greater than military law. She reached into her dress and pulled out a document, official papers bearing territorial seals, a treaty, already signed by 5 tribal councils and 3 territorial governors. All we needed was a witness from outside both governments to make it binding. Caleb stared at her in amazement. You had this planned from the beginning. The drowning was real, she said softly. My fear was real, but so was my hope that someone would choose to save more than just one life. She looked at the fragments of the broken stone scattered around their feet. The sacred test was never about the stone itself. It was about what people would do when they had the chance to choose unity over hatred. Colonel Hayes kept his rifle trained on the group, but Caleb could see doubt creeping into his eyes. The paper Ayanna held was official, legal, and binding. More importantly, it offered a path forward that didn't require anyone to admit defeat. The treaty establishes joint settlement areas, Morrison explained to his superior. Shared hunting grounds, combined defense against external threats, and mutual protection of sacred sites. It's not surrender, Colonel. It's strategy. Hayes lowered his weapon slowly, the fight draining out of him as he realized the political reality. A treaty already signed by territorial governors couldn't be undone by a military officer, no matter how much he disagreed with it. Months later, Caleb stood in the same clearing where everything had changed. The settlement that had grown around his property was unlike anything the territory had ever seen. A community where native and white families lived side by side, where children learned both languages, and where disputes were settled through counsel rather than violence. The fragments of the broken stone had been gathered and placed in a memorial at the center of town, reminding everyone of the choice that had brought them together. Sometimes, Caleb would catch children from both cultures playing around the memorial, making up stories about the magic rock that had once glowed with inner light. Ayanna had married one of the young tribal leaders, and their wedding had been celebrated by the entire community. She often visited Caleb, bringing her children to hear the story of the day their world had changed. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him one afternoon, as they watched those children play together in perfect harmony. Caleb thought of the man he had been before he pulled a drowning girl from a storm-swollen river. That man had lived alone, trusted no one, and seen difference as danger. "Not for a single moment," he said. The treaty they had forged that day wasn't perfect. No human agreement ever was. But it was living proof that when people chose courage over fear, unity over division, impossible things became inevitable. And somewhere in the laughter of children who would never know their parents as enemies, the spirit of that shattered stone lived on. If you enjoyed the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more stories like this. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with courage, sacrifice, and a choice that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice. Click on the video now.